Hello and welcome everyone to everything that's wrong with the Chinese import mini excavator. This is a 4.5 ton AGT industrial mini excavator. And we're gonna go front to back and tell you everything that's wrong with it and what we did to fix it to make it a reliable, useful machine. So let's start over here. Ours came with a cab. And the very first thing we did was take that cab off because it got so hot in the cab, you were gonna sweat to death. You were just completely open down here with like a 2-inch gap to the engine compartment. So all that engine heat, the fan was pulling in, pressurizing the engine compartment and blowing that right up your back. And now you're sitting in this cab and the glass was tinted, but 85 degrees outside, it's 120 degrees in there. You couldn't stand it. You couldn't do it. So we took the cab off and we built a ROPS. So that's the first thing wrong with these is the cab gets way too hot. So we drew up this ROPS and welded it up and bolted it on there. It's not gonna save you if you're tumbling down a hillside. You don't even have a seatbelt, but it is gonna save you if you're trenching in some irrigation or something like that and you drop a track in the ditch or the sidewall gives way and you tip over. It's gonna keep the machine from rolling on top of you. You'll bend it up, I'm sure. It's all Schedule 40 pipe, but it'll keep it from rolling over on top of you. So the other issue that this machine had right out of the box, I should say right out of the shipping container, is it would overheat in about 10 minutes. The engine temperature would overheat, the alarm would go off, and the oil would get so hot that the hydraulics would stop working. You'd have no power. It just wouldn't work anymore, and it sounded bad and sounded weird. So the original radiator on this is a split radiator, so half water, half oil, not nearly enough. So the oil was getting so hot that it was heating the water up just from being in the same radiator that everything was getting too hot. So we added this exterior oil cooler in the line. So the oil goes out of the pump, it does whatever it's gotta do, it comes back, it goes through the original oil cooler that has the radiator fan pulling air through it. It comes out of that and it goes up to this, which also has an electric fan. So if the key is on, that fan's running. That way, when you're stationary and you're digging, you're always moving air over your oil cooler. And then from there, it returns back to the tank. And so we went from like 200 degrees oil temperature. The machine would be unusable at that point. And now we're constantly 120 degrees, exactly where it should be. And it's perfect. And by cooling off that oil, it cooled off the motor as well. So now there is no thermostat in the motor, but the motor runs just fine right in the middle of the temperature range. Never gets hot, never overheats anymore, just because we got that hydraulic oil cooled off. So that's the second thing wrong with this thing is they overheat. And I know I've seen on the smaller ones, like gas is boiling in the gas tank because it's so hot in that engine compartment. So it seems like no matter what size you buy, you got to figure out how to cool the engine and how to cool the oil. So this was our solution. I think it works good. It's safe. It's out of the way. I think that's a good solution. It was easy to do. So solved that problem. All right. The other problem with these import minis, and it seems like everyone has this, whether you have the 1 ton or the 4.5 ton. I haven't seen many machines bigger than this. I don't know if they're making minis imports like this that are much bigger. I'm sure they are, but everyone has this exact same problem. You think you're bold enough to turn while tracking, and you're gonna walk right out of your tracks. So this thing constantly, you couldn't walk through the gravel and turn without walking right out of the tracks. So first of all, off the trailer, out of the shipping container, they're not tensioned properly. So to properly tension these tracks, you got to lift the track off the ground so you get a droop on the bottom of the track. And these larger ones are hydraulically tensioned. with grease. So you pump that grease up until the bottom of the track is within a half an inch of the bottom roller, and that's properly tensioned. It still doesn't stop the tracks from coming off, but it is properly tensioned. So it's a bad design. The tracks are a bad design. So what we did is there's 3 rollers. There's the drive sprocket, the idler, and then there's 3 rollers on the bottom to spread the load out and 1 on top. So what we did is we took these rollers out. And so here's the middle one. Let's see if you can get in there and see it. Here's the middle one. And it just kind of rides on top of these studs in the track. And it's barely in the groove. So what we did is we took out the front roller and the back roller and we welded on this plate. I cut it on the CNC, basically a big washer, and welded it on. So now you can see this is supposed to ride in this groove, and all that keeps this centered is just this little lip in the middle. And so now we added this. That comes almost all the way down. There's about an eighth, quarter of an inch between the bottom of this ring, or this gate, or this, I don't know what you would call it, and the track. So it never actually touches the track, but it keeps that from going in or out, walking off. So it's on the back side, or the inside of the track, and on this side. Real simple. You just take these bolts out. You gotta loosen the track, take this out, that drops out, and we just slid it on and welded it on. Put it all back together. So real simple. I did that on the front roller, and I did it on the back roller on both tracks. And that solves, I have not walked off the track since. So that solved that problem. All right, the other problem with these is this one, and I think most of them come with auxiliary hydraulics. And unless you specifically buy one with a hydraulic thumb, your hydraulics will most likely be one-way auxiliary hydraulics. So to run a cylinder, you obviously need 2-way hydraulics. One-way is great if all you're running is post hole diggers and concrete breakers, because that oil just spins a motor in there, and that's fine. But if you want a hydraulic thumb, you need 2-way. So I couldn't find a thumb that would go on this machine. So we just bought a Chinese thumb for a 4-ton mini excavator, and we had to adapt it. So we have the accessories kit, I guess you would call it, where we got a couple different buckets, we got a rake, and we got the quick connect for the buckets. So instead of pounding pins out every time, you can just unthread it. There's like a threaded clamp. So we got the quick connect, but we also wanted a thumb, and the thumb has to go where the quick connect goes, but we wanted the quick connect too. So we bought this thumb, hacked it up, modified it, and you can see how here's the original width of the thumb, but we needed to get out and around the quick connect. So the quick connect bolts and everything are still there in the pin, and then we added, we added this gusseting. This is made all out of 1/2 inch. There's 2 gussets to really strengthen it up, so that we could put our thumb and our quick connect on all at the same time. And so it's greasable. Everything's right. And then we had to make the mount for this end of the cylinder. So that was easy. We just welded on these ears with the holes in it and machined some sleeves so that the pin had a little surface area. We bought the cylinder from Surplus Center, modeled up a quick mount on the top. And you can see it's welded on real good on a hole on the inside all the way around. Same thing, pin is stationary and pinned, greasable. So we just kind of set that up there and strapped it on and kind of moved it around. And first thing we did was get the thumb straight away and figured out. And then we put the cylinder up there, and we just kind of figured out where we wanted the boom to be when the thumb was straight down. Because, if you move this down, your thumb will go farther down, but it won't come as far up. So you don't want that thumb to be in the way when you're just digging. So we had to kind of mess with it to get the most thumb action we could and still have it out of the way when you're not using it. So we got the thumb on, but we still had the issue of one-way hydraulics. So we could close it, but we couldn't open it. So the way the auxiliary hydraulics work on this machine is it's electric. So you just push a button on your control stick. It would open an electric solenoid valve, which would open or move the oil. So on some of the smaller machines, when you are controlling it, you're physically, mechanically connected to the spool valve and you're moving it. On the larger machines, this is set up just like a Caterpillar or any other big excavator. You're actually moving pilot control or pilot oil pressure. So there's a bunch of lines in here connected to your stick, and this is just a valve. And as you move it, you're directing low pressure hydraulic oil down to the control valve. So the way this control valve works is the pump is feeding this. And so there's a pump and return to tank, or pressure and return to tank feeding this control block. And each one of these is a function. A cylinder, your curl cylinder, your boom cylinder, your pivot. Each one of these is a function. And there's a spool valve in there that moves back and forth. And there is a small hydraulic line. If you can see them in here, those small hydraulic lines get pressure from your control inputs to push that spool valve back and forth. So this line would push it that way, that line would push it that way. So if you moved your stick to curl your bucket, the spool valve would move one way, and say it moves to the right, then this line might open to tank and this line would get the flow and the cylinder would move. And then if you moved your controls to close the bucket or uncurl it, whatever, the spool valve would move the opposite direction, reversing these, and the other one would open the tank, and then this one would get pressure. So this line here is my auxiliary hydraulics, and I assumed that the spool valve in there was both ways. So what I did was, originally I had a solenoid that was controlled by a button on the stick, and when you press that button, it would let pilot oil push that spool valve that way and open this line to pressure and this line to tank, and then you could spin your auger or your concrete breaker motor. And then, but there was nothing on this side to push the spool valve the other way. So what I did was I took that line coming out of that solenoid valve off the block, and I hooked it up to another two-way hydraulic solenoid valve. So you see there's two solenoids on there. It will open, it'll flip tank and pressure on these two lines, and it also has a return to tank. So what that allowed me to do is move the auxiliary control from the button to a switch. So I can turn the switch on, that would turn on the solenoid. So now oil is leaving the solenoid and going to my open center solenoid valve here. And then if I'm not pressing a button, returning the tank. These two buttons then controls one solenoid. So open, close, right? So I press one button and that solenoid opens and it sends oil, pilot pressure out one line to move the spool valve one direction, giving me flow in one direction. And then I can let go and I can press the other button, which reverses that, sends flow, pilot pressure out the other line onto the other side, pushing the spool valve the other direction, thus giving me two-way hydraulic pressure, or two-way hydraulics. So I left the original solenoid valve in there because there's a pressure relief valve on there, and there's other lines hooked up to that block that I am not sure what they do. So I think that might actually be the pressure what's controlling the actual pressure, the relief pressure for the whole pilot system. So I left it on there, hooked that solenoid up to a switch so it's always on, and then I can control open and close on my thumb or on my auxiliary hydraulics with that. All nice and tidy under the floor. I did have to buy new control sticks because the original only came with one button. So now I've got 3 buttons on each. So these are unused. This is horn, this is unused, and this is open and close. And then I put the switch. So if that switch is off, then there's no thumb, period. So if you bump it, it doesn't matter, it won't move. So I can show you how that works then. I'll start her up. Sorry, it didn't move for a second because the safety lever was up. So this was in the safety position. So there's a valve in here that just dumps all the pilot pressure back to tank. So if this is up, you have no pressure to move anything. So for a second, I couldn't figure out why it wouldn't run. Turn that down. Then I got pilot pressure to everything and the thumb would work. There you have it for the auxiliary hydraulics. So we've got about 70 hours on this machine, and so far we've got every issue that we've come across taken care of. Now the seat sucks, so we're looking for a new seat, but that's easy. That's no big deal. You replace the seats on everything. So there you go. The engine overheats, hydraulic oil overheats. The auxiliary hydraulic system is hit or miss if you get two-way or one-way. So there's a simple way to make it two-way hydraulics if you don't have it. Easy way to get the thumb on and retain the quick attach capabilities of the quick attachment so you can change buckets and get the cab off so you don't die from heat stroke inside the cab and a nice ROP. So there's everything that's wrong with a Chinese import excavator and how to fix it. Thanks for watching.